that I'm talking and that you won't have champagne in your glass, this is the part to get past. If you can muscle through this, I promise there's some really, really good wine in your future. All right? So, champagne is a place. This is something that I get, I would say, 2 out of every 3 times that we go out with non-wine or restaurant people. They will say, what's your favorite wine? And I'll say, it's got to be champagne. And they'll say, oh, I love that grape too. And then I have to do the mental arithmetic. Do I say something or don't I? It depends on who it is and what kind of bottles they're opening. I don't want to alienate them. But it is a place. I think we all know this. It is defined by these very unique characteristics of the terroir. And by the way, it drives me crazy when I'm at wine discussions or seminars, tastings, and people use this word terroir, but there's no real common definition discussed beforehand. So when I'm talking about terroir, I'm not just talking about the unique microclimate, the geology, the way that the land slopes towards or away from the sun, drainage, but for me, I'm also thinking about culture as well. I think that's an inextricable part of what makes Champagne such an incredibly unique product. Pinot Noir. He always felt like Pinot Noir was going to produce a better wine. And he also focused on vineyard management and limited skin contact. So with the limited skin contact, there's all kinds of other benefits there. You're limiting possible oxidative damage. You have much more control over that juice, right? Remember, he has to limit skin contact. If he's making white wines and he's focusing on Pinot, it follows that he has to just make sure these berries are picked cool, press gently, let the skin run. That's pretty impressive for the mid-17th century.
And the New York Times had an article a couple of weeks ago, or last week maybe, about all the sort of things you can find. In addition to that, if you go to Pommery, they actually had school, they had hospitals, all these things underground, inside the caves for years. For 4 years, the city basically went underground. And they still have the X of where, if you're hurt, this is the direction to go. It's still inside the cave. The other interesting thing is before this, and this is about, I was just in Pommery, is why I've been there, but let's talk about it. They say, well, we put in electricity in 1915. They have these massive mosaics that were built in the 1800s, put in the chalk in the 1800s. Why'd you put it in? Well, we had a lot of people down here, and we need to have light. So before that period, it was all candle.
Which is very healthy for you. Sorry. So,
that were cut out not for wine, but were cut out to make the cathedral and to make glass and to make the aqueduct that you saw there by the Romans. And as the French will tell you, the Gallo-Romans dug them out, meaning the French, the Gauls, dug them out because they were slaves to the Romans. And they dug them out, and you'll see at the top a hole. And there would be a rope that would pull out a piece of chalk, and it would go create this awesome cathedral where all the kings of France were crowned, etc. But it all came from the ground. And what do you do with all that space? Perfect place to put your wine. And it's a constant 11 or 12 degrees centigrade year-round.
And now a number of them, yeah, they do. They're still using them now, not just for storage of wine, but also art installations, exhibits. I believe it was at Pommery a few years ago. There was a Formula One car that they somehow got down there. Appropriate music around it.
That from a structure perspective, when they think about the wines and when you teach them about that, they sort of can pull it out.
I think there's still confusion among consumers that how can this be made with red grapes or black grapes if it's white. I think there's still that level of education that can happen from the consumer standpoint. So Sam was talking before about the regulations that dictate what happens in Champagne in the vineyards, in the cellars.
There's the chalk that also keeps the wine perfectly in its condition. In the early 1900s, before the First World War, a couple of the houses decided to buy grapes from somebody else. There was a riot, literally, like burned down, pitchfork fires, burned down the barns, etc., where the growers realized that if their product was going to be from outside the region, that Champagne would be hurt and that they would lose access to that product. So since there were some points back and forth, but basically since 1927, the lines have been very clearly drawn, written, etc., about what goes in Champagne, what doesn't go in. Port and others have been around since the 1500s. Champagnes are parcel by parcel driven. So there are 319 villages that are included in the AOC. And inside those villages doesn't mean you can plant the grapes anywhere you want. You can only plant them in specific parcels that have historically been planted by grapes, have a soil composition that matches the norm for the area, and was basically in 1927 included. There've been one slight revision in the 50s, but basically if you grew Champagne grapes in 1927, which was not a very valuable crop, you were able to continue to grow them. And now we are completely full. So there are 77,000 acres, which is 32,000 hectares, in which you're allowed to grow the grapes that go into the bottle of Champagne. No grapes from outside are ever allowed